You're lucky. Watching live sports never used to be this easy. Running up and down that field looks tough.
It's a pitch.
Get way more into what you're into when you stream on the Xfinity 10G network.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inquirer Live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity, alongside EJ Smith. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming from the Eagles press box here live, getting set for today's game against the San Francisco 49ers. EJ, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Olivia. It's another week, another highly anticipated matchup between the Eagles and another team that, is considered one of the best across the NFL. And the weather is kind of reminiscent of last week as well. It's a little bit gray, a little bit dreary out there. Not quite as rainy, which I think the Eagles will be happy about. But yeah, no, I'm excited for the show and excited for the game.
Well, hopefully wherever you're at, everyone who's watching, we can brighten your day with a little bit of Eagles discussion. Before we get into that, as always, you can be a part of our conversation. If you head on over to inquirer.com/Eagles Gameday, you can leave us a question, a comment, truly whatever is on your mind. We want to hear from you. We're going to answer some of your thoughts toward the end of our show today in a segment we like to call the Fan Zone. But first, DJ, we got to talk about who's playing and who's not in our health report. There's some notable names among the Eagles players who are not playing today. Inside linebacker Zach Cunningham is sidelined with a hamstring injury. He's not in the lineup. Safety Justin Evans continues to deal with a knee injury. He's on injured reserve, and it's trending toward the direction of him going on season-ending injured reserve. We'll have a little bit more information for all of you hopefully next week when that comes, if and when that happens. And then tight end Dallas Goedert is inactive today. He is still dealing with a forearm injury. He has missed the last 2 games, and he will not be in the lineup today. So, EJ, lots to unpack there, but let's specifically talk about Cunningham's absence. Who should we expect to see on the field in his place today?
Yeah, the Eagles came into the season really thin at linebacker, and it's kind of been the case all season that they haven't had a lot of depth at that position. So losing Cunningham's a big deal. I mean, Nakobe Dean was already on injured reserve. So now they're kind of down to Christian Ellis and Ben Van Sumeren, 2 guys who haven't played a lot of football, Ben Van Sumeren being an undrafted rookie. But I think that you're going to see probably mostly Christian Ellis. That's who came in for Cunningham against the Bills last week. Had some decent moments, but kind of was a little uneven. And this is a really tough matchup for any linebacking core. Even good linebackers struggle against the San Francisco 49ers offense with all of the misdirection and play action and, middle of the field stress that Kyle Shanahan can put on a defense. So definitely, one of the biggest spots on the field to watch when the Eagles defense is on the field.
Mm-hmm. So definitely some big names there, Dallas Goedert not playing in today's game as well. However, there is some good news among the players that are going to be playing today is tight end Grant Calcaterra. He missed last week's game with an ankle injury. In addition to Calcaterra, the Eagles will get back right tackle Lane Johnson. He did not play last week with a groin injury. Defensive tackle Milton Williams and defensive tackle Fletcher Cox are both back this week. Both of those players did not play last week. Williams dealing with a concussion, Cox dealing with a groin injury. So some big names there, but especially with Johnson and Fletcher Cox, 2 really big parts of the Eagles trenches. I guess what could just having the 2 of them back in the lineup do for the Eagles in today's game?
Yeah, starting with Lane Johnson, as well as Jack Driscoll played last week, Johnson's, presence in the offense is one of the foundational pieces of how the Eagles offense operates, being able to have 2 offensive tackles who can operate on an island without help, without the game plan being, on a week like this where they're playing Nick Bosa and Chase Young on the edges. They can trust those guys to hold up in one-on-one matchups when they throw the ball, and that's a huge deal. So having Lane Johnson back is definitely a big development for the offense. I want to see how he looks. As tough as Lane is, sometimes you have to be sure he's actually 100% or close to it. He's the type of guy who's going to play through anything. So I think it's going to be interesting to see early on how limited he may be because of the injury that held him out last week. But having him back, his presence is huge for the offense. It really changes what they're able to do. On the other side with Fletcher Cox, I think we're going to get to it in a minute here, but the Eagles defense played a lot of snaps last week. And, the 49ers are a very good rushing team. They're the type of team that will run right at you if given the opportunity. And having a rotation of defensive tackles, Milton Williams especially too, having those guys being able to work in this week is going to be huge.
No practice squad elevations for today's game for the Eagles. Flipping it over to the 49ers, though, EJ, are there any big names that are or are not playing today?
Yeah, so Eric Armstead missed some of the week of practice, but he's expected to play. So that's a big development for a 49ers defensive front that's really talented. I'm sure we'll get to them later too. And then Ray McLeod, the 49ers wide receiver, he's actually out today. So, I think the Armstead one, if you're looking at that 49ers defensive front, they're tough to run against. They're tough to pass against. So him being in the line is a big deal for them.
All right, let's transition into our latest headline segment. There's obviously so many storylines. Last year, the 2022 NFC Championship game, the Eagles faced off against the 49ers. It was a very interesting game. There was, we'll talk a little bit more, about the quarterback issues that the 49ers had to deal with. But if you look at this particular matchup in this very moment, the 49ers are incredibly well rested headed into this game. They have been off for the last 10 days, just eating, sleeping, dreaming about the Eagles. Meanwhile, the Eagles have played 3 games in their last 14 days. So the Eagles have been busy recovering, especially after that overtime game against the Buffalo Bills. The Eagles defense in particular were on the field for 92 Bills plays. So we've got some very potentially tired Eagles defensive players that have been working to get their legs back throughout the week. That being said, EJ, how might fatigue play a role in today's game?
Yeah, I think that at the very least, usually a team traveling cross country, you would think has a little bit of a disadvantage in that area. But at the very least, their rest coming into this game definitely neutralizes that. And like you said, we get paid to write about the Eagles and think about the Eagles critically. And I'm not sure if we've thought about the Eagles as much as this 49ers team has in the last few months. So, I think that it's definitely, it could be a positive, could be a negative for the 49ers, how much emotion they've put into this matchup and, kind of the identity that they have tied up in potentially winning or losing this game, what it might say about their playoff run last year and what they are this year. So, I think the Eagles stretch, this is as close to a playoff stretch as you can play in the middle of a regular season where you go from the Chiefs to the Bills, now to the 49ers, where you're playing, playoff caliber, Super Bowl caliber teams. I know the Bills record isn't that good, but they're a talented team. So, you're playing really, really high level teams each week. That can start to add up. You mentioned the snaps. I mentioned the snaps earlier. Against this 49ers team, the defensive tackle rotation is going to be really important, especially because I think that it's going to be imperative that they keep them out of second and manageable, third and manageable. They're going to have to be able to stop the run. Having those guys fresh would have been nice, but that's not where the Eagles are operating from at this point.
EJ, you mentioned the fact that the 49ers have been fixated about this game in particular. There was a ton of offseason chatter, some may call it trash talk, coming out of the 49ers corner. A lot of it is rooted in the fact that they didn't have their quarterback throughout most of the last matchup between these two teams. And you look at Brock Purdy, he tore a ligament in his elbow in that game, and he was sidelined for the majority of it. And now he is a really key piece to this 49ers defense. They're third ranked in scoring right now. And if you look at the leaderboards among, some of the stats among quarterbacks, he is right at the top of some really key ones, including, he has the league high passer rating, yards per pass attempt, yards per completion percentage. He ranks atop the league in all of those areas. So what is the key to try and limiting his impact in today's game?
I would say, unsurprisingly, it's what they did in January. It's get to him and affect him with the pass rush. He has been pressured on 40% of his dropbacks this year, which ranks 8th among qualifying quarterbacks. And he hasn't been sacked that much. I think he's only been sacked 20 times this year. So he's been able to get out of those situations. But I think the formula is exactly what it was last year. Now, listen, you're never trying to say, let's, injure somebody. But I think affecting him, getting to him is going to be the key for the Eagles defense. The 49ers have a lot of talent at wide receiver, running back, tight end. They are very multiple and versatile. They have these interchangeable parts. You don't know where guys are going to line up. And the Eagles' middle of the field defense, something we'll talk about later, is something that has been a problem all year. Being able to stop tight ends and slot receivers and stuff like that. That's going to be imperative today for the Eagles. That's how the 49ers really make their hay on offense. So being able to impact Brock Purdy is going to be the difference in the game. And I think, that is really the only way that you beat elite offenses in general, but especially this offense.
You mentioned the Eagles pass rush. EJ, the 49ers defense also has an incredibly formidable pass rush. And you look over there and there's a familiar face that the Eagles know very well in Javon Hargrave, who signed with the 49ers in the offseason as a free agent. He is second on the team right now with 6 sacks. And he rounds out a really talented group that includes Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, and Chase Young, recently acquired from the Commanders. We also mentioned earlier in our show that the Eagles get back right tackle Lane Johnson, and he's a big part of their pass protection. But that being said, when you look at the battle in the trenches on both sides, regardless of who's on the field, who has the advantage?
Yeah, I would say that the Eagles have the advantage just because it's good on good. The 49ers offensive line has some, household names, some talented players. Trent Williams especially is a very good left tackle, but they aren't as across the board solid as the Eagles up front. I think the Eagles offensive line has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt, even against good pass rushing groups. You think of Washington, especially. That's a team that's always seems to have a very good pass rush, and the Eagles always seem to be able to kind of skate by against that team, especially. So, I think that the Eagles offensive line against a good 49ers defensive line, I mean, we've seen the Eagles offensive line struggle against the Chiefs particularly, but the Chiefs got pressure more so with creativity and stunts and games. The 49ers are more about just getting upfield, being aggressive. And I think the Eagles should be able to handle that, and win those one-on-one matchups and keep Jalen Hurts upright.
Certainly a key matchup in today's game on both sides there. Let's transition to the best zone, the fan zone, to answer some of your questions and consider some of your comments. Let's take this first one here from Surfer. They are hoping that the Eagles don't let Swift hit free agency. They made a really good move in getting him during the offseason. Are we talking about DeAndre? Are we
I was
talking
about to say,
Taylor?
which Swift? Yeah, never know.
The latter has already signed with another team. It appears that she has no longer
switch
on
sides.
the side
Yeah.
of the Eagles. Yes. So, but I think for the sake of today, let's talk about DeAndre Swift, the fact that the Eagles traded for him in the offseason. He is by far the number one running back in this Eagles offense, and he has started to come on gradually in recent weeks. That being said, EJ, knowing kind of the value of running backs, or at least how teams treat running backs in today's world, the fact that Swift is just going to be here at least on his present contract for this year, what might the Eagles consider doing with him when his contract expires?
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that, the two of the top teams in the NFC have very talented running backs that sort of, now listen, Christian McCaffrey is in a league of his own, but sort of have a similar type of playing style, similar, type of versatility, I would say. I think that is one of the big reasons why DeAndre Swift has been so valuable to this team and honestly been one of their best offseason additions. I wrote about it this week. I talked to some of the offensive linemen and asked them, a lot gets made of the offensive line and Jalen Hurts being the reason that the run game is so good. So the team doesn't need a talented running back, doesn't need a high-priced running back, one of these high-value guys. But with DeAndre Swift, now listen, they didn't have to pay a ton to get him. They sent 2 7th-round picks and a 5th-rounder or a 4th-rounder that they can recoup with a comp pick if he signs elsewhere. His production does not line up with that level of investment. He's 4th in the NFL in rushing yards. He's averaging 4.8 yards per carry. And most importantly, he's able to do a lot of damage from different spots in the offense. He's able to line up in the backfield. He's able to run with power, run with quickness. He's got good vision, but he's also able to line up in the slot. He's able to line up out wide, motion, run jet sweeps, and really stress the defense in the way that, he does this to a certain level, and then Christian McCaffrey does it to an elite level, so I think these are two teams that see the value in that position. Again, value can be almost a taboo word when you're talking about running backs, but, I do think that when you look at these two teams and the way they're constructed, obviously DeAndre Swift isn't the focal point of the Eagles offense, but, I mean, he's been huge for them the last couple weeks, especially, getting them out of these situations where, maybe they are a little bit stuck in the mud. I mean, Jalen Hurts last week said that DeAndre got, kind of sparked the offense. And he's done that a few times in the last few weeks where he breaks off an explosive run and they kind of get going. So definitely, one of the best, if not the best offseason addition. And yeah, for sure is outplaying his perceived value, I would say.
The the Eagles have a lot of football left to be played, but it will certainly be interesting when the offseason rolls around and they have to make a decision on DeAndre Swift. So thank you so much, sir, for your comment. Let's take a comment here from BMG. They say that the 49ers have more talent than the Eagles. The Eagles will need to put together 2 good halves of football to win. We haven't seen a whole lot of really balanced halves from the Eagles. Usually it's skewed one way or the other. And especially last week, you look at last week, the Eagles really came on in the second half. In the first half, it felt like it was a completely different offense, especially what is kind of like the how do you get the Eagles going off on a better start, especially given the fact that they have struggled on their opening drives this season?
Yeah, I think it's a confluence of things. Obviously, I wish it were just as easy as saying, oh, they should call better plays or they should just, do better on the plays. But I do think that, whatever it is, they're going to have to figure it out. I think that that's a good point from BMG that, they have been able to beat teams mostly this year without playing their best football, without being at their best. And I think, against this 49ers team, especially, like, you're going to need your best most weeks when you play a team this good. So, I think this is going to be an important test for the team, going into the playoffs. Again, the Eagles have been so talented and so capable of beating teams that they haven't needed it yet. But I do think that they're going to need it at some point. So against this team, that's, again, like we mentioned, spent a lot of time thinking about this game, a lot of time, thinking about what this game would mean to them. So, I think this is going to be a challenge for them. And I think it'd be, a kind of another test passed if they're able to, kind of put together a closer to complete game. I'm not sure you ever get to a truly complete game, but a closer to complete game against a really good team.
Absolutely. Thank you, BMG, for your comment. Let's take this last one here from Philly Guy 54. They say that the Eagles should bring tight end Zach Ertz back. Even when Dallas Goedert comes back, he'd easily be the Eagles' number 2 tight end, and the Eagles can use 2 tight end formations a lot. This is an interesting thought, Philly Guy 54. You're certainly not the only person who has been thinking about this. Certainly, Ertz's release from the Arizona Cardinals earlier this week has been a big discussion point nationally and speculation as to where he might go. Reportedly, he is interested in signing with a Super Bowl contender. I would think that the 10-1 Eagles certainly qualify as a Super Bowl contender, at least at this point in the season. And of course, Ertz has a history here in Philadelphia, spending most of his career here. But all of that being said, EJ, does it make sense for the Eagles to want to bring back Ertz if they are?
I do think it makes sense. I mean, Dallas Goedert seems like he's really close to coming back. He was doubtful today. It seems like he's definitely on track, to make a return here soon. But I do think that having another, viable receiving option, Jack Stoll has played well, but Zach Ertz has been productive. He hasn't been healthy the last few years. He's kind of been banged up a lot, but I mean, when he's played, he's still been productive. I think he could add something, as a number 2 tight end, as Philly Guy 54 mentions. I think that he could also occupy different spots in the offense. Like, when he was here before, you saw him in the slot, you saw him split out wide, you saw him in line. So, I think his role would obviously be a lot different if he came back. I don't think he's unseating Dallas Goedert in the way that they were before Dallas Goedert left, or before Zach Ertz got traded. But I definitely think it makes sense. I think what's really going to be the deciding factor is probably going to be about what Zach Ertz wants. Does he want to come here and be the number 2? I think he's going to have opportunities to be a number 1 somewhere. I think Baltimore is a team that makes sense, who is in need of a tight end. I think Kansas City might be interesting. Obviously they have Travis Kelce, but they use a lot of 2 tight end sets and 3 tight end sets as well. So I think he's going to have some options. I think the Eagles will, probably end up tires on him and seeing, and I think that would make sense to bring him back. But I do think that there's probably more to it than just that.
Mm-hmm. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions and your thoughts. We appreciate it as always. Let's move on to my personal second favorite segment of our show, our predictions, where we get to put on our look into the future a little bit and see if we can try to guess what the final score might be. Rarely are we successful, but nonetheless, let's bring in our colleague Jeff McLean to talk about his prediction and what he will be keeping an eye on in today's game. I guess we can start with that, Jeff. What is your key in this game that you'll be paying attention to?
Well, I think you guys touched upon the linebacker situation, but just to bring that to light real quickly, I wouldn't be surprised to see them use a lot of Sidney Brown in this game, and maybe even and dime as it, maybe he'll be like the third linebacker, maybe even the second linebacker because Christian Ellis obviously struggled last week. But the other area I'm really focused on is this offense and Brian Johnson and his play calling. As we did a recent podcast episode for Uncovering the Birds that was released on Friday where we talked to Brian. I talked to Nick Sirianni. I talked to Jalen Hurts. I talked to some analysts. I talked to Dan Mullen, who was pretty much Brian Johnson's his mentor in college, brought him to Utah, then had him coach for him as well. And just to kind of get to the bottom of Brian's play calling so far this season. I know it's been kind of a hot topic. Brian's become increasingly like a lightning rod, I think, for some fans and maybe some media members in terms of how he's called plays. We tried to be as objective as possible and looking at it. Has it been perfect? No. Did they get off to a great start? No. But I think over these last few weeks, what's been most impressive has been the adjustments that Brian has made in the second half. And that's why they've pulled off these kind of, I wouldn't say miraculous victories, but nonetheless, very impressive late game victories over the Chiefs and last week against the Bills. This week, I think this is the toughest team, top to from start to finish that they're going to have to face this year, and they can't come into the first half and not get things going offensively for long stretches. I just don't think that's going to work, and that if that happens, I'm not sure if they're going to win this game. So the key is going to be in some regards how they start. That's a lot of Nick Sirianni. Nick's got final say on the game plan. He's, this is his offense. I think we have to emphasize that as well. And I think when you look at that start, that's on Nick more than it is on Brian Johnson. But Brian has to be able to kind of, play off that, see what the defense is doing, how they're playing him. The same goes for Jalen Hurts in terms of what he has to do with the line. So I'm really interested to see how they start this game. If they come out hot and score right away, then, I think this could tip the scales, in favor of the Eagles. If not, then it could be a slugfest. If they get behind against this 49ers team, I think that's when you're going to see the Eagles struggle.
With that all in mind, Jeff, what is your prediction for this game?
It's probably a coin flip. The 3-point Eagles being 3-point underdogs at home, I think is a little bit of a reach. But to pick, to suggest that the 49ers are the better team, I don't think that's much of a stretch, especially the way that they've played versus the way the Eagles played. So I'm going to go with the 49ers. I see a close one, 24-23. And, if they win, then forget about that. I even never said it. My predictions haven't been great. I've gotten a couple wrong this year when I've picked against the Eagles. The Dolphins, I picked Miami. And when they faced Kansas City, I picked the Chiefs. But, I also didn't pick the Eagles. I also picked the Eagles against the Jets, and I lost that one. So anything is possible.
Anything is possible. EJ, what are you thinking for today's game?
Yeah, I had the Eagles winning 28-24. I think there's going to be points in this game, but I'm not sure if it's going to be like explosives and, like really big plays down the. I kind of expect more of extended drives, that might keep the score a little bit lower. But I think both of these offenses have advantages that they can exploit. When it came down to picking, I honestly just feel like this Eagles team has shown me enough to not pick against them in this type of situation, in this type of game. They have just been so good in these big games. So, I think that the Eagles are good enough to beat anybody when they're playing their best. I think the 49ers are good enough to beat just about anybody when they're playing their best. So, yeah, I went with the Eagles 28-24. Kind of like Jeff, I'm going to take that line from you. If I'm wrong, then let's just never talk about it ever again.
We'll wipe this footage from the internet. No one will see it. It's totally fine. EJ, I went with a similar thought process as you. I've picked the Eagles as well, winning 30-27. I kind of also see it as the Eagles have been very good late in games, not making mistakes, where we've seen their opponents make some late game mistakes, especially the Bills. I think we've looked at some of these games as like, oh, the Eagles got really lucky here. The other team really kind of got in their own way, but it really does take two to tango when it comes to these games. I mean, the Eagles are kind of sticking it out late in games, and they are playing as best as they can, whereas we've seen some of the other teams kind of tail off or make some mental mistakes, and that ends up costing them. So just because the Eagles have that track record of playing well when it matters most in these games and figuring out ways to win, even when it might not seem like earlier in the game or in parts of the game that they don't necessarily deserve to, I think that they they deserve some credit for that. And until they prove me wrong, then I'm going to keep picking them. So again, 30-27 Eagles is my prediction. We'll see what happens. Who knows? But Jeff, thank you so much for joining us as always. We appreciate your insight.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Of course. All right, let's get into our Inquirer player picks, EJ. Lots of players are going to be playing in this game, believe it or not. That said, and we've talked about a lot of them, who are you going to be keeping an eye on in today's game?
I thought about James Bradbury after all the literal trash talk. And I thought about DeAndre Swift, but we kind of touched on DeAndre Swift already. Give me Jalen Hurts as a runner. I think Jalen Hurts is a little bit too easy to pick as a quarterback, but specifically what he contributes to the run game, I think could be a big factor in this game. He had 65 rushing yards last week, which was the most he's had since week 5. Obviously the knee is feeling a little bit better, and I think they're ready to get him more involved in that facet of the game. So against this 49ers defense, they haven't always been the best against the run. I think they're ranked 20th in DVOA against the run. So I think there's going to be opportunities there. I think that Jalen Hurts will be able to capitalize on these defensive ends. A guy like Nick Bosa does not really want to deal with the zone read stuff as much as he just wants to get to the quarterback. So I think they might be able to take advantage of some of his aggressiveness and get Jalen Hurts out in space and impact the game as a runner.
All right, a non-Devontae Smith pick from EJ. Shocking. Personally, I'm shocked, but thank you for your contribution there, EJ. My prediction, or the player that I will be keeping an eye on in today's game, is edge rusher Hassan Reddick. We've talked about the Eagles pass rush and how important it's going to be in today's game. With Reddick in particular, he is the team's leader in sacks with 8.5. He did not have a sack last week against the Bills, but if you look at the way his season has gone, aside from the 3 straight games to start the season, he hasn't gone consecutive games without a sack. So if there's ever a time to get to the quarterback, today is certainly going to be the day for Hassan Reddick. I will be keeping an eye glued to him throughout the game. Even on the sideline, I will have my vision multiple, making sure he's hanging in there, he's doing well, and that he is ready to go when it comes time for the Eagles defense to get on the field. So I'm going with Reddick. All right, everybody, let's transition over now to Devin Jackson, Inquirer's web betting producer, to take a look at the odds for today's game.
Thanks, EJ and Olivia. I'm Devin Jackson of Philly Parlay, here to give you the best betting action ahead of the NFC title rematch between the 49ers and Eagles. And we'll jump right in. The Eagles are 3-point underdogs at home against the 49ers. That line was +2.5 in favor of the 49ers earlier in the week, and now is up to -3 in favor of the 49ers. But the Eagles are the most bet underdog at BetMGM ahead of today's matchup, which goes to show you this is the game of the year for the NFL, as well as for bettors. The trash talk all over the offseason will certainly carry over into this game, and it will make a must-watch for any NFL fan, and not just for the Eagles and 49ers fans. But we'll take a look at the best player props worth playing in this matchup. First, we'll start with DeAndre Swift. He's been the engine for the Eagles running game all season long, and will have to be the engine once again in this matchup. The conditions aren't conducive for throwing the football, so DeAndre Swift taking his over 52.5 rushing yards at FanDuel is worth the play. Christian McCaffrey, 73.5 rushing prop total at FanDuel as well. I think Christian McCaffrey will do a really good job in the receiving game, but I think the Eagles will do a nice job in defending the run, clogging up those running lanes and forcing the 49ers to throw the ball through the air, where I think Christian McCaffrey will have a big impact, but running-wise, it doesn't appear so. Jalen Hurts plus 600 odds on scoring 2 rushing touchdowns in this game, certainly worth the bet. When you look over the last 2 weeks, Jalen Hurts has scored 2 rushing touchdowns in each of the last 2 games, and he has a rushing touchdown in his last 3 games overall. He's getting going and getting healthier as the season goes along. And for this Eagles offense to sustain drives, they're going to have to run with Jalen Hurts. And when they get down into the red zone, he's going to be a big factor, as we saw in that walk-off rushing touchdown in last week's overtime win over the Buffalo Bills. Now we'll take a look at the notable bets and action in this game. Jalen Hurts anytime touchdown score. We just talked about that as one of the best bets to play in player props. He's the third most bet anytime touchdown score entering this week. Christian McCaffrey is the fourth most bet anytime touchdown score. And of course, they're featured in our best player props, and they are the most bet touchdown scores of the weekend, which just shows you how important they are to their offenses. And finally, the 49ers and Eagles have the most bet point total of the second most bet point total of any NFL game this weekend at over 47 points. This is the most bet game on tickets and on the money for sports books across the country. So this is a game worth watching and, of course, participating in the betting as well. We'll send things back to EJ and Olivia. You enjoy today's game. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Devin, and thanks so much to all of you for tuning in to Inquire live at Gameday Central, sponsored by Xfinity. The party is not over. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Gameday to follow along during the game with us. We will be in there chatting with all of you guys, answering your questions in real time from the press box.
That's right. And remember to stay up to date on all of our Inquire Sports coverage by subscribing to our Sports Daily newsletter. You'll see our most recent articles along with other Phillies, Sixers, and college sports coverage. A lot of the articles referenced throughout this segment are also going to be in there.
You can also keep up with Philly's most seasoned beat reporter on Uncovering the Birds with Jeff McLean. A new episode dropped earlier this week, as Jeff mentioned, so you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to inquire.com/podcasts. That's all for today, everyone. Thanks again for joining us and tuning in to Game Day Central, sponsored by Xfinity.